Let me ask you something. If the person sitting across from you at dinner was lying about everything, their name, their family, their entire identity, would you say something? Or would you sit there, cut your steak, sip your wine, and decide that the lie was somehow more interesting than anything the truth had offered you in years? I chose the second option. Her name wasn't Lily. I knew that before the appetizers arrived. I knew it the moment she opened the menu, and her face did something no Hargrove would ever let their face do in public. It went completely, honestly, beautifully blank. Like a person seeing a price tag that could pay 3 months of rent. She recovered fast, but not fast enough. I said nothing. I picked up my own menu, and I thought, whoever you are the most interesting person I have met in years. My mother has exactly one weapon, and she deploys it with the precision of a surgeon. She calls at 7 in the morning, Melbourne time, which means she has done the math on the time difference, which means she has been awake thinking about this, which means whatever she is about to say has been rehearsed. "Marcus," she said, "we found someone for you." I was standing in my kitchen in Carlton with a coffee I had not yet touched, looking out at a gray Australian sky. 3 years I had been in that city. 3 years of lecture halls and research grants and a life so quiet it had started to feel less like peace and more like hiding. "Mom." Her name is Lily Hargrove. Her family owns half of Pacific Heights. "Mom, you are 35 years old, Marcus. Your father is not getting younger. I am not getting younger. And you are alone in a country where you know nobody." That last part was not entirely true. I knew people. I had colleagues who invited me to dinner parties, and students who thought I was interesting, and a landlord who liked me enough to fix things within a week. But she meant something else, and we both knew it. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 4 days. Then I booked a flight home to San Francisco, and I told myself it was for my father's blood pressure, and not because some small part of me, a part I did not like admitting to, was tired of eating dinner standing up. The flight is 14 hours. I did not sleep for any of them. I have never been good at sleeping in transit, and I had a lot to think about, mostly the fact that I was at 35, flying across an ocean to be introduced to a stranger by 2 people who had known each other since they were 19 and had apparently decided that romance was a logistics problem. My parents picked me up from the airport. My mother hugged me for a full 30 seconds. My father shook my hand and told me I looked thin, which is what he says instead of saying he missed me. The dinner was set for Thursday. Quince Restaurant, 7 o'clock. 3 Michelin stars. My mother said the name like it was a password. I got there 10 minutes early because I always get everywhere early. It is not politeness. It is a control mechanism. If you arrive first, you choose where you sit. You learn the room, you watch the door. You spend the first 10 minutes gathering information instead of being gathered. So I was watching the door when she came through it. And I want to be honest with you about this part because everything that happened afterward depends on it. My first thought was not suspicion. My first thought was that she was beautiful in a way that felt almost deliberate, like someone had chosen every element of her appearance with a very specific goal in mind. The dress was ivory, expensive, immaculate. Her hair was done. Her posture was perfect. She walked toward my table the way people walk when they are counting their steps. "Marcus, Lily." She sat. And the moment she sat, the performance developed its first crack, and I saw it because seeing things is the only thing I have ever been genuinely good at. She did not know what to do with her hands. People who have grown up in expensive restaurants do not think about their hands. Their hands know where to go. Napkin lap done. It is muscle memory laid down over 1,000 dinners before the age of 12. This woman placed her napkin in her lap, then adjusted it again, then put both hands flat on the table like she was bracing for turbulence. Then the server brought the menus. I have replayed this moment more times than I would like to admit. She opened hers and her eyes moved down the page, and for exactly 1 second her entire face went blank. Not bored, not unimpressed. Blank the way a face goes when the brain behind it has stopped processing language and is doing arithmetic instead. I watched her read a number and understand what that number meant in the context of her actual life. Then she caught herself. She smiled. She said something about how she was in the mood for something light. And she closed the menu without reading another word, which is what you do when you have decided you will simply order whatever the other person orders. There it was. 90 seconds in, and I knew. I did not say anything. I want to be clear that I could have. There was a version of that evening where I set my menu down and said politely, "I think there has been some kind of mistake." That version would have been reasonable. It would have been correct. It would have ended with two strangers apologizing to each other and going home. I did not choose that version. I ordered the tasting menu and asked her if she wanted the same, and she said yes so fast it was almost funny. Then the sommelier came with the wine. He poured hers first, and she watched him do it. That is the part that stayed with me. She did not glance at the glass and continue talking the way people do when wine is simply a thing that appears. She watched the pour. She watched the color move up the side of the glass and settle, and something crossed her face that I can only describe as quiet, private wonder, like a person witnessing something they had only ever seen in photographs. She noticed me watching. She recovered immediately. "Sorry," she said with a small laugh. "I was just thinking about work." Lily Hargrove did not have a job. I had been briefed. I knew that the way I knew her father's name and the square footage of the family estate because my mother had emailed me a document. And I remember thinking very clearly, sitting there with a glass of wine I had not yet touched, "Whoever you are terrible at this. And I have not been this interested in anything in 3 years." So I lifted my glass and I smiled at her and I let her keep the lie. Then dinner began and it got so much worse. The first course arrived and brought a problem with it. At a restaurant like Quint's, the silverware is laid out in advance, and there is a logic to it that you either learned as a child or you did not. Outside in. Simple. But the first course was a delicate thing involving raw fish and a citrus foam, and it came with a fork. I will admit I had to think about myself small and narrow with 3 tines. She looked at that fork for a moment too long. Then she picked up the wrong one. And she knew immediately that she had picked up the wrong one because she froze with it halfway to the plate and her eyes came up to check whether I had seen. I had already picked up mine. The correct one. I saw her see it. And here is where I did the only thing I could think of that would not humiliate her. I set mine down, picked up the same one she was holding and used it instead. Something in her shoulders came down about an inch. "I never remember which one," I said. 3 years in Australia. You lose the habit." "Right," she said. "Australia. Melbourne." "Melbourne," she repeated, and I could hear her filing it away like a fact she might be quizzed on later. We talked. She was good at talking, which surprised me. Whoever she was, she had a quick mind and a genuinely funny way of describing things, and if you had listened to only the audio of that dinner, you might have believed every word. But I was not listening to only the audio. She said her father had just come back from Singapore. 10 minutes later, she said her parents had been in Napa all month. When I asked which of the family properties she liked best, she said the one by the water, which is a thing you say when you do not know the answer and are hoping the question has one. Every explanation she offered was the kind of explanation that only works on someone who has already decided to believe you. A child would have believed her. And I want you to understand something about me. I am not a generous man in that particular way. I have spent my entire adult career reading people for a living. When someone lies to me, my instinct is to close the door. I did not close the door. I held it open and let her walk through it again and again all night. I have thought about why. The honest answer is that everything about my life at that point had been arranged by other people. My mother arranged this dinner. The Hargroves arranged their daughter. My department arranged my calendar 3 semesters in advance. And here sitting across from me was one unscheduled thing, one variable nobody had planned for. I was not going to be the person who ended it. We finished around 9:30. Outside, San Francisco had gone cold in that particular way it does in October, the fog rolling up from the bay so you can taste the salt in it. "Do you want to walk?" I asked. She hesitated. Then she said yes. We went down toward the ferry building and the lights on the water were doing what they do, and for about 3 blocks it was almost easy. She laughed at something I said. A real laugh, not a dinner laugh. I remember noting the difference and wondering how many other differences there were that I had not yet learned to hear. Then I noticed she was falling behind. Not much. Half a step, then a full step. She was walking slower and slightly differently, and when I looked down at the sidewalk beside me, I saw why. Her shoes were beautiful, pale elegant, the kind of thing that photographs well. They were also unmistakably too small. The strap had cut a raw pink line across the back of her ankle, and the skin above it had gone red and angry, and she had been walking on that for 3 hours without once mentioning it. I did not say anything. I want to be honest about what that moment did to me because it was not pity. Pity would have been easy, and I would not have respected myself for it. What I felt was closer to recognition. Everything else about her that evening had been assembled: the dress, the hair, the story, the name. But nobody performs a blister. That mark was the one entirely true thing she brought with her that night, and she had spent the whole evening trying to make sure I did not see it. I slowed down. I stopped at a window to look at nothing in particular so she could catch up without it being a rescue. The window I stopped at happened to be a shoe store. It was one of those small storefronts that stays lit all night, 3 or 4 pairs on pedestals like museum pieces. And in the center on a low stand was a pair of heels in a pale pearl color that caught the street light and threw it back in about 6 directions. She stopped next to me, and I watched her face in the glass. Her eyes went to those shoes and stayed there. Her whole expression opened up for a second, completely unguarded the way it had been over the menu, except this time it was not fear. It was wanting. Then she remembered who she was supposed to be. "They're all right," she said. "I could buy 1,000 pairs like that. I probably have something similar at home." It was the clumsiest thing she said all evening, and she said it with her ankle bleeding into a shoe that did not fit her. I looked at the shoes for another moment. I did not correct her. I said something about how the color was unusual, and we kept walking. At her car, I asked for her number. She gave it to me, I think mostly out of surprise. "There's a coffee place on Market," I said. "Sunday morning. Come, I'll have something small for you." She looked at me carefully, trying to find the trap in it. "A gift." "Something small," I said. She drove off. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute in the cold, and I thought about a woman who could not name a single Hargrove property, but could look at a pair of shoes like they were a country she had heard about but would never visit. What I did not know and would not learn for weeks was that she went straight to Lily Hargrove's apartment that night, and that when Lily asked her how it went, she shrugged and said he was fine. He was polite, she barely noticed him. And that Lily laughed and said, "Marina, don't be ridiculous. A man like that isn't looking at you. I got to the coffee place on Market Street 20 minutes early, which by now you understand is simply what I do, and I put the box on the chair beside me where she would not see it right away. She came in at 10:05. Different clothes. That was the first thing I noticed. The dress at Quince had been immaculate and slightly wrong for her. The way a costume is wrong even when it fits too formal for her body language, too old for her face. What she wore that Sunday was simpler. A gray sweater, jeans, a jacket that had been rained on more than once. She looked about 4 years younger and about 10 times more like a person. "You're early," she said. "I'm always early. It's a character flaw. It's a personality." She sat down across from me and wrapped both hands around her cup the second it arrived, and I noticed she did not think about her hands at all this time. Nobody performs in a coffee shop. That is why I chose one. We talked for a while about nothing. She was funny. I keep saying that because I want you to understand it was not just the mystery that had me sitting there. She was quick and dry, and she noticed things about the people around us that I had missed, which almost never happens to me. Then I put the box on the table. She stopped with the cup halfway to her mouth. "What is that?" "Something small." "Marcus. Open it." She looked at the box for longer than most people would. It was white, unmarked, tied with a plain ribbon, and I think she was hoping it was chocolate or a book or anything that would not require her to have a reaction. She untied it. She lifted the lid, and she saw the pearl heels sitting in tissue paper. I have made a professional study of faces. I have published on it. And I am telling you that in the 2 seconds before she got control of herself, that woman's face did something I have not been able to describe accurately in the years since. It was not delight exactly. It was something more painful than delight. It was the expression of somebody being handed a thing they had already finished convincing themselves they were never going to have. Then the shutter came down. "These are—" she cleared her throat. "You really shouldn't have, I mean it. I have shoes, I have a lot of shoes." "I know," I said. "You told me. 1,000 pairs. So keep this one anyway." She was already shaking her head, already reaching to close the lid, and I put my hand flat on the table, not touching her just there. "You can buy 1,000 pairs, I said. "I believe you. But the thing I give you I want you to treasure. That pair is the only one like it on that street," I asked. She went very still. I do not know what she heard in that sentence. I know what I put in it. I was 35 years old, and I had been polite for 3 years straight, and I had just found the only unplanned thing in my entire life sitting across a table from me pretending to be somebody else, and that was the closest I could get to saying so without ending the whole arrangement right there. She did not say thank you. That is the part I remember most. She closed the box very carefully, the way you close something you have decided is yours. She put it into her bag, and then she turned her head and looked out the window at Market Street for about 4 seconds, and she did not look back at me until whatever was happening on her face had finished happening. When she turned around, her eyes were slightly red, and she talked about the weather. I let her. Later, when the coffee was cold, I ran one small test. I am not proud of it, but I am not going to pretend I did not do it. Your grandfather started with the Sacramento portfolio, didn't he? I said. Before the city holdings. There is no Sacramento portfolio. There is no city holdings. I made both of them up on the spot. Right, she said. Sacramento. That was yes. That was the beginning of everything, really. And she smiled at me, pleased with herself, the way you smile when you think you have cleared a hurdle. I smiled back and let it go. That was the moment I understood the shape of what I was in. Not a mystery. A choice. Every hour I spent with her, I was choosing not to ask, and she was choosing not to tell. And each of those choices was a small brick, and we were building something out of them whether we admitted it or not. We left together around noon. On the sidewalk, she stopped and hesitated, and then she did a thing I had not expected. She took the box out of her bag, sat down on the low wall outside the coffee shop, and changed into the pearl shoes right there on Market Street. She put the old ones in the box. She stood up and tested her weight on them like someone stepping onto ice. They fit. I know they fit because of how she walked away. She had walked into Quince counting her steps. She had walked down the Embarcadero half a step behind me with her ankle bleeding. That Sunday afternoon, she walked up Market Street with her chin level and her stride even and her hands in her jacket pockets, and it was the first time I had seen her move like the ground belonged to her. She was still lying to me about everything, but she was walking like herself, and I thought whoever that is, I would like to meet her. The second dinner was arranged by our families. So was the third. My mother sent me the details by text message with an efficiency that suggested she had a spreadsheet, and both times we sat in restaurants chosen by people who were not in the room, and both times she was flawless and I was bored. Not with her, with the container, because here is what I had learned. In a restaurant she was performing. She had a script and a posture and a set of safe answers, and the woman I had watched change her shoes on Market Street disappeared the second a waiter approached with a wine list. So on the fourth day, I texted her something my mother had not approved. Golden Gate Park. Saturday. No reservation, no dress code, no families. She took 40 minutes to answer. I could feel her thinking about it from across the bay. Fine, she wrote, but I'm choosing where we walk. She chose the far end past the windmills where the park stops being landscaped and starts being actual trees. The fog was coming in off the ocean the way it does in October, thick enough that the tops of the cypress went soft and gray about 30 feet up. She was wearing sneakers. I want to note that. Not the pearl shoes, not anything from the Hargrove wardrobe. Beat-up white sneakers with a mark on the toe. Those are new, I said. These are 11 years old. Even better. We walked for a while without talking. Most people cannot tolerate more than 90 seconds of silence on a walk. I count it as a compliment when someone can. She could. She went 4 full minutes. Then she said, "Why did you actually come back and don't say your mother?" "My mother," I said. "Marcus." I thought about how to answer that honestly, which was a new problem, because I had spent 3 years answering it dishonestly to everyone, including myself. I took the position in Melbourne because it was the furthest good offer from here, I said. That is the entire reason. There were closer ones. There was a better one in Chicago. I took the one that required a passport and a 14-hour flight and a time difference so bad that nobody could call me casually. Because of your parents. Because of the whole arrangement. Everyone I grew up with had their life decided by the time they were 26. Job, house, wife, the correct neighborhood. And they seemed fine. That was the part I could not get past. They seemed fine. And you weren't. I was 32, and I could see the next 40 years laid out in a straight line, and I could not find a single moment in it that was going to surprise me. I looked over at her. So I left. And then I built a life in Melbourne that also had no surprises in it. Which is the joke, really. I ran 10,000 miles to be bored somewhere with better coffee. She laughed. Then she stopped laughing and looked at the ground and said something I do not think she meant to say. My mother worked doubles at a place on Telegraph for 19 years, so I could... She caught it. She caught it about 4 words too late. I kept walking at exactly the same speed. There is no Telegraph in Pacific Heights. Telegraph Avenue is in Oakland. It runs up through the flats past the taquerias and the check-cashing places, and it is not a street that appears in any conversation about the Hargrove family. "So you could what?" I said. "So I could go to school, get out, the usual." She waved a hand. "It's not interesting." It sounded interesting. It's not. I let it go. I have been asked why I let it go. The answer is not especially noble. Every time I did not ask, she told me a little more. Pressure would have closed her. Patience was working. But something had changed on that walk, and I felt it happen in real time. Up to that point, I had been collecting evidence about a stranger. Standing in the fog next to a woman in 11-year-old sneakers who had just accidentally handed me her mother, I stopped collecting. I did not want to solve her anymore. I wanted her to stay. That is a genuinely dangerous thing to realize about a person who is lying to you. Near the end, she stopped on the path and turned and looked at me with an expression I could not read, which almost never happens. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Why do you keep asking me things you already know the answer to?" Everything in me went quiet. She meant it innocently. I am sure of that now. She meant the small talk, the family questions, the things a briefing document had already told me. She had no idea what she had actually said. I looked at her for a moment too long. "I don't know the answer to any of this," I said. We drove back separately. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 10 minutes doing nothing. What I did not know was that she drove straight across the bridge and let herself into an apartment in Pacific Heights and sat down on the edge of a very expensive sofa with her hands shaking. And that when Lily Hargrove came out of the bedroom and asked how it went, she said in a voice she barely recognized as her own Lily, "I think we need to stop this. I was not in that room." Everything I am about to tell you she told me later, sitting on a curb outside a bar in Oakland at 1 in the morning, and she told it badly out of order, the way people tell you the things that still cost them something. But I have thought about that conversation more than almost any other part of this story. Because that was the night the whole thing could have ended clean, and it did not, and the reason it did not was not me. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on Broadway with a view of the bay worth more than most houses. Lily Hargrove had lived there alone since she was 23. She came out of the bedroom with a glass in her hand and said, "So, how was he?" And Marina said, "Lily, I think we need to stop this." There was a pause. Then Lily laughed. That is the detail that has always stayed with me. She laughed. "Stop it, Marina, it's been 10 days. My mother is finally off my back for the first time in a year. He's asking me questions I can't answer. So make something up. You've been making things up beautifully." "That's the problem." Marina was still standing. She did not sit down once during that whole conversation. "I'm not making things up beautifully. I'm making them up badly, and he's letting me." "Then he's an idiot." "He is not an idiot." Something in the way she said that changed the temperature of the room. Marina heard it about a half second after Lily did. Lily set her glass down. "Oh," she said. "Oh no. Don't. Marina. It isn't like that." "Then what is it like?" And Marina, who is the most honest person I have ever met when she is not being paid in favors to be somebody else, could not answer. She told me later that she stood there trying to construct a sentence that was true, and every version she got to had the same problem, which was that a man had bought her a pair of shoes because he had seen her ankle bleeding and had never once mentioned it. And there is no way to say that out loud without telling somebody everything. So she said, "It's making me feel like a bad person. That's all. Every time he's kind to me, I feel worse." And Lily, who I think genuinely believed she was being reassuring, said the thing that decided the next month of all of our lives. "Marina, listen to me. He's not being kind to you. He doesn't know you. He's being kind to Lily Hargrove because that is who he flew 14 hours to have dinner with. He likes the idea. He likes the name and the house and the version of a life attached to it." She picked her glass back up. "That's all he sees. Trust me. I've been watched by men like that since I was 19. I want to be fair to Lily here because I am about to be extremely unfair to her later, and she has earned it. In that moment, she was not being cruel. She was describing her own life. She had spent a decade being valued for a surname, and it had made her cynical. The trouble was that she said it to a woman standing in front of her in borrowed shoes. Marina told me she felt something drop out of her chest. Because if Lily was right, then the last 10 days had been a man being charmed by a costume and everything decent that had happened inside them belonged to somebody else. And if Lily was wrong, then it was worse. Because then a man was falling for a person who did not exist, and Marina was the one building her one dinner at a time. 3 more, Lily said. That's it. 3 more dinners and my mother relaxes and I'll start being busy and it fades and everyone walks away fine. That's how these things end. They always end. And what do I tell him? You don't tell him anything, that's the beauty of it. Marina said okay. She did not say it because she was convinced. She told me that on the curb in Oakland, and it is the only part of the whole conversation she seemed ashamed of. She said okay because Lily had covered her rent twice in college. Because when Marina's mother was in the hospital, Lily had driven across the bridge at 2 in the morning without being asked. Because there is a kind of debt between women who have known each other since they were 9 that never gets written down and never fully clears. So she said okay, and she went home to Oakland. The next morning at 7:40, my phone lit up on the kitchen counter of my parents' house in San Francisco. Golden Gate again this weekend. I found a spot you'd like. No dress code. And I stood there in my father's kitchen holding that phone and grinning like a man who had just gotten away with something when in fact I had not gotten away with anything at all. The spot she found was a set of stone steps below the arboretum where somebody had planted redwoods too close together 80 years ago, so the light comes down in pieces and the city goes silent. We had been sitting there maybe 20 minutes. She was telling me about a woman she worked with who had strong opinions about laminating things, and she was doing the voice, and I was laughing, and it occurred to me that I did not want to go back to Melbourne. I had 6 days left on my ticket. So I said, "Can I ask you something and you don't have to answer it?" That's a terrifying way to start. "Who are you?" She did not move. That is what I remember. Most people flinch. She went motionless the way an animal does when it decides stillness might still save it. "What? You heard me." "Marcus. You're not Lily Hargrove." The color came out of her face in stages. I have seen many people react to being caught. It was not guilt arriving. It was a structure coming down. "Who told you?" she said. Her voice had gone thin. "Was it Lily? Did somebody call you? How long have you—" "Nobody told me. Somebody had to tell you." "You told me," I said. She stared at me. "You told me the first night. You told me before the first course arrived." I turned so I was facing her properly. "You opened the menu at Quince and your face fell off. 1 second. That was all. And I watched you do arithmetic in your head and decide not to order anything with a number beside it you could not survive reading twice. That's not— You didn't know what to do with your hands. You picked up the wrong fork and then you checked to see if I saw. You watched the sommelier pour your wine like it was a magic trick." I said it gently. "I want that on the record. Nobody who has been drinking that wine since they were 15 watches it get poured. They talk over it. They do not look at it once." Her eyes had filled. She was not letting anything fall. "You told me your father was in Singapore, and then you told me your parents had been in Napa all month. You said your favorite family property was the one by the water. There are 4. 2 of them are on water." I paused. "And every single time you explained something, you explained it the way people explain things to children. Only a child would have believed you." "Then why," she said, and her voice broke in the middle of it, "why did you keep coming?" And there it was, the only question that ever mattered. "Because I chose to," I said. "Because the lie was the most interesting thing that had happened to me in 3 years, and because the person underneath it was better than anything the lie was pretending to be, and because I did not want to be one more person in your life who took something away from you before you were ready to hand it over." She put both hands over her face. I did not touch her. I sat on a cold stone step and let a woman fall apart at her own speed because it was hers and not mine. When she came out from behind her hands, she told me everything. She told me about this call from Lily 11 days earlier, panicking, saying her mother had arranged a dinner with a man she had never met, and could Marina just do this one thing? She told me about the dress that was not hers and the shoes a half size too small because they were Lily's and Lily has smaller feet. She had memorized a page of notes in the car. She had walked into Quince expecting to survive 90 minutes with a stranger who would not notice her and walked out with a man asking for her number. And she told me about the coffee shop. She said she had opened that white box and understood in 1 second that I had seen her ankle bleeding, said nothing, and gone into a store afterward to ask which pair was the only one of its kind. She said she had sat on her floor in Oakland that night holding a shoe and crying and could not explain to herself why. Then she stopped and waited the way you wait for a verdict. "What's your name?" I said. She looked at me like she had forgotten anybody would ask. "Marina," she said. "Marina Coyle." I said it out loud. "Marina, yes, that fits better." And she laughed. Wet and wrecked and completely unguarded, and it was the first sound she had made in 11 days that was not somebody else's. We sat there until it got cold. Then we walked back through the trees, and at the top of the steps she took my hand, and neither of us commented on it because that would have required deciding what it was. Here is the thing, nobody warns you about the truth. I had spent 11 days wanting her to tell me. I got it. And walking back to the lot with her hand in mine, I understood we had just removed the only thing protecting us. There was no script anymore, no arrangement, no cover story to hide behind if this went badly. Just a woman from Oakland and a man with a plane ticket 6 days out. That was so much more frightening than the lie had ever been. 4 days. That is what we had between the redwoods and the dinner that broke everything, and I have never in my life gotten more out of 96 hours. She took me to Oakland. It was a test, and I passed it by having no reaction to a third-floor walk-up with a radiator that banged. She cooked. Badly. We ate it anyway. Her mother called, and Marina put her on speaker and introduced me as a friend, and her mother asked whether I was eating enough, which is apparently universal. On the third night, standing in the parking lot of a taqueria on Fruitvale at 11 o'clock, I told her I was not getting on that plane. She said, "Marcus, you have a job." I said, "I have a job that will still exist in 3 weeks." And then she kissed me. I had been kissed before. I had never once had the experience of understanding immediately and without any evidence that a thing had just become permanent. So we were 2 days into whatever that was when she said we had to tell Lily. I did not want to. I want that on the record too. My position was that Lily Hargrove had put a woman in shoes that did not fit and sent her into a restaurant to lie for 11 days and was owed a text message at most. Marina's position was that Lily had been her friend since they were 9 and deserved to hear it at a table. Marina won. Marina usually wins. We picked somewhere neutral. Not Quince, not anywhere in Pacific Heights. A place in Hayes Valley with paper menus and good pasta. I got there 20 minutes early. Marina 10, and we sat holding hands under the table like teenagers waiting for a principal. Lily arrived 8 minutes late. I had seen photographs. The photographs were accurate. She was polished in the specific way money produces, and she walked in scanning the room, and when she found our table, something happened to her face. She saw me, and she stopped for about a half step. I do not think she had ever asked what I looked like. She had spent 11 days calling me the man my mother arranged a category rather than a person, and she had built a picture to go with it, and the picture was not this. She sat down. She smiled. And the entire first 20 minutes were completely pleasant, which is the part that still bothers me. She was charming. She apologized to me directly and well. She said she had panicked, that it had been a stupid thing to do, and that she was grateful Marina had bailed her out. She ordered a bottle of wine for the table and asked me about Melbourne. And then she kept asking me about Melbourne. I have been in enough rooms to know when the geometry of a conversation is changing. Her chair had turned angled toward me by 15 degrees more than when she sat down. Her questions had stopped being about the university and started being about me. Every time Marina spoke, Lily's answer went to Marina and then came back to me for confirmation, like Marina was a topic rather than a person. Marina got quieter. I watched it happen. That woman had spent 11 days performing confidence she did not have, and she was folding it back up in real time and putting it away. I moved my hand onto the table where it could be seen and put it over hers. Lily looked at our hands for exactly as long as it takes to understand something. Then she laughed and picked up her wine and said it. "Marina, honestly, you never told me he was like this." Marina said, "Lily, no, I mean it. You said he was nice. You said, and I'm quoting you, that he was polite and you barely noticed him." She was still smiling. That is what made it so much worse. "If I had known, I would not have let you take my place." The table went silent. I want you to sit in that silence because I did. A woman had just said out loud at a public table that if the merchandise had been better, she would have collected it herself. Marina did not look up. She had gone still, her hand cold under mine, doing the thing I would come to recognize as her oldest habit, making herself smaller, waiting for a bad moment to pass over her the way weather does. I was not going to let it pass over her. I set my glass down. "You had your chance," I said. "You chose not to show up." Lily's smile held for a second. Then it did not. Excuse me. There was a table. There was a time. Your mother sent you the details the same way mine sent me. You decided a stranger was not worth an evening of your life and sent your friend to sit through it. I kept my voice level. So no, you did not lose anything. You gave it away and someone better picked it up. Then I turned to Marina, stopped looking at Lily Hargrove entirely, and asked her if she wanted dessert. Lily left 12 minutes later. She said she had an early morning. Marina apologized 3 times on the drive home. I told her 3 times that she had nothing to apologize for. What neither of us knew was that Lily sat in her car in the garage on Broadway for a long time before she went up. And then she called her mother. The invitation came 31 hours later. My mother read it out at the breakfast table with her hand pressed flat against her collarbone the way she does when something has exceeded her expectations. Dinner at the Hargrove residence, Saturday, 7 o'clock, both families. A formal celebration of what she called, and I am quoting her, the wonderful progress. My father said it was a good sign. I sat there with my coffee and did arithmetic instead. 31 hours. Lily had walked out of a restaurant in Hayes Valley humiliated by a man she had decided too late that she wanted. She sat in a garage. She called her mother. And 31 hours later there was an engraved invitation on my parents' kitchen table. Nobody plans a formal dinner for 2 families in 31 hours to celebrate anything. You plan it that fast for one reason. You plan it that fast because you want everyone in the room at the same time. I called Marina from the driveway. Don't go, I said. I'll go alone, I'll handle it. No. Marina. No, listen to me. Her voice was steadier than I had ever heard it. I spent 11 days at tables pretending to be somebody I'm not. If there's a table where I stop, it's that one. I'm not sitting at home in Oakland while people talk about me in a room I was too afraid to walk into. I stood in my parents' driveway with the phone against my ear and felt something in my chest go completely quiet. Okay, I said. Then we go together. She showed up at 6:40 in a navy dress she had bought herself off a rack at a store where the tags were numbers she could read without arithmetic. And the pearl shoes. You sure? I said. They're the only thing I'm wearing tonight that anybody gave me honestly, she said. The Hargrove house is on one of those streets where the sidewalks are wider than the ones 4 blocks down, which is a thing you notice once and then cannot stop noticing. There was a man taking cars. There were flowers in the entry arranged that day by somebody whose job that is. 14 people. That was the first thing I registered walking in. Not 2 families, 14. Aunts, a business partner, somebody from a board. My parents already there, my mother lit up like a woman whose long campaign has finally worked. You do not invite 14 people to a small family dinner. You invite 14 people when you want witnesses. Mrs. Hargrove came to greet us personally, and I will say this for her, she was extraordinary. She took both of Marina's hands. She said how lovely it was at last all of us together. She complimented the dress. She seated us at the center of the long table directly across from herself, where every person in that room had a clean sight line. Lily was 4 seats down. Lily did not look at Marina once in 90 minutes. Not once. She looked at her plate and at her glass and at the middle distance, and every time her mother spoke, Lily's shoulders went up about a 1/4 inch. That was when I knew for certain. Under the table, I put my hand on Marina's knee. She put hers over it and did not let go for the rest of the meal. Dinner was excellent and enormous and took 2 hours. The conversation was pleasant. That is what I want you to understand about people like that. There was no cruelty in the room for 120 minutes. There was wine, a story about a boat, a funny anecdote from an uncle about a stolen bicycle in 1978, and my mother laughed until she had to dab her eyes. I ate almost nothing. I have never in my life been so aware of a clock I could not see. They brought coffee. The plates went. The table settled into that loose, warm end-of-the-evening hum where people turned to the person beside them. And Mrs. Hargrove set down her cup and let the room go quiet and said into that quiet in the pleasant voice of a woman making an introduction, Marina Coyle. Everything stopped. She was looking directly at Marina. Not a question, not surprise, a name being read off a page. Marina Coyle, she said again. Of Oakland, 27 years old, a first-grade teacher at a public school on Fruitvale Avenue. Mother a waitress, 19 years, no father listed. Rent-controlled apartment, no assets, $26,000 of student debt outstanding. A fork touched a plate. Somebody said her name quietly like a warning. My mother's face had gone the color of paper. Marina did not move. "We know exactly who you are," Mrs. Hargrove said. She was still perfectly pleasant. She had not raised her voice once. "And we know exactly what you did. 11 days of it. In my daughter's name at my table in front of my friends." She lifted her cup and looked at me and smiled. "The question," she said, "is whether Marcus does." The whole table turned to me. 14 people. My parents. My father with his hand halfway to his water glass, his eyes on me the way they were when I was 9 and had broken something. I sat very still. I was aware of Marina's hand under mine and how cold it had gone. Then I put both my hands flat on the tablecloth and I looked across at Mrs. Hargrove and I did not blink. "Why don't you tell me," I said, "what you think you know?" She told me. She told it beautifully, too. She laid it out for the table like a woman reading minutes into a record. A young woman of no means had been given access to a family she had no business near. She had worn my daughter's clothes. She had used my daughter's name. She had let a decent man from a good family believe he was courting somebody he was not. 11 days, she said. In front of my friends, in front of yours. She turned to my parents when she said that last part. It was expertly done. My mother made a small sound. "We are not vindictive people," Mrs. Hargrove said. "But this ends tonight. She leaves this house, there will be no further association between our families, and the arrangement your firm has been discussing with my husband since March is regrettably no longer something we can pursue." My father set his glass down very carefully. "That was the real weapon. I want to be honest about it. It was never about Marina. It was about making my parents pay a price for me so that they would make me pay a price for her." I opened my mouth, and Marina stood up. Chairback napkin on the table on her feet in front of 14 people in a navy dress off a rack and a pair of pearl shoes. "You're right," she said. The room went so quiet I could hear the ice settling in somebody's glass. "My name is Marina Coyle. I'm from Oakland. My mother did wait tables for 19 years, and I do teach first grade on Fruitvale, and those are the 2 best things about me." Her voice shook on the first sentence and then stopped. "I sat at your table under a name that wasn't mine, and I won't pretend that was all right because it wasn't." Mrs. Hargrove began to say something. "I'm not finished," Marina said. I have thought about that sentence for years. 3 words from a woman whose oldest reflex was to go small and wait for weather. "I didn't decide to come to that dinner," she said. "Lily asked me to." Nothing happened for about 2 seconds. Then Lily said, "That's not true." "Lily, that's not Mom, that's not what happened." "You called me at 4 in the afternoon," Marina said. She never once raised her voice. "You were crying. You said your mother had set up a dinner with a man you'd never met and you weren't going and you asked me to go instead. You gave me the dress. You gave me the shoes. You wrote me a page of notes in the car and told me to memorize the properties." "You wanted to go," Lily said. Her voice had gone up. "You wanted to see what it was like." "You had your chance," I said. I had not planned to speak. It came out flat and quiet and stopped that table like a hand on a wire. "You had your chance," I said again. "You chose not to show up. She went because you asked her to, and she stayed 11 days because you told her to keep going when she came to you and said she wanted to stop." Lily looked at me. "And then that girl broke apart in front of her family and everybody they knew. It was not graceful. She put her hands over her mouth and her face came undone, and she said into her hands that she had never thought it would go anywhere. She said she was sorry about 8 times. She said Marina had asked to end it and she had said no." Mr. Hargrove had not spoken all night. He set his napkin down and looked the length of the table at his daughter, and when he spoke he did not sound like a wealthy man. He sounded like a father who has just learned which person at his table is the liar. "You sat there," he said. "You sat at my table for 2 hours and let your mother do that to her." Mrs. Hargrove's face did not move. "That is what I remember about her. 14 people watching her family come apart in a room she had staged, and her expression did not move 1 millimeter. I stood up. "I knew," I said. My mother said, "Marcus, I want the whole table to hear this. I knew she wasn't Lily on the first night at Quince before the first course arrived. I knew from the menu and the fork and the wine. I let her keep going, and I asked for her number afterward anyway." I looked at Mrs. Hargrove. Nobody deceived me. I made a choice, and I would make it again in the same order. I turned to my father. "I'm sorry about the deal." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he shrugged one shoulder the way he does. "There'll be others," he said. "I have never loved my father more than in that exact second." Mrs. Hargrove stood. She did not say anything. She did not throw us out or raise her voice or issue a final line. She placed her napkin beside her cup, unhurried, walked out of her own dining room in front of 14 guests, and left them sitting in the wreckage she had built. That was the loudest thing that happened all night. I turned to Marina. She was still standing. Her eyes were wet and her chin was level. I put out my hand, and she looked at it for one long second in front of everyone and took it. We walked out of that house into the coldest fog of the year, and neither of us said a word until we were 3 blocks down the hill. Then Marina stopped on the sidewalk, bent over with her hands on her knees, and made a sound that started as crying and turned into laughing before it finished. "I'm not finished," she said into her own knees. "I said that, to Eleanor Hargrove, in her own dining room." "You did." "I've never said that to anyone. I've never even said it to a substitute teacher." I crouched next to her on the sidewalk in my good suit, and we stayed there a while. 2 people on a hill in Pacific Heights, laughing like lunatics outside a house we were never going to be invited back into. Then I looked down at her feet. Pearl shoes, still perfect. No marks because they fit. Here is the short version of what came after. I flew back to Melbourne 11 days later because you cannot abandon a position, and spent 4 months finishing what I owed them. We talked every day at hours that were reasonable for exactly one of us. Then I took a lectureship in the East Bay for significantly less money and moved into a 3rd-floor walk-up with a radiator that bangs. My mother came around faster than anyone expected. 6 weeks. What did it was the classroom? She visited unannounced the way she does and saw 24 7-year-olds go silent when Marina raised one hand and she came home and said that woman is not soft. In my mother's vocabulary, that is a wedding toast. My father and Mr. Hargrove did a version of the deal 18 months later. Business is business. Nobody mentioned that dinner. That is how those people work. Lily and Marina did not speak for a year and a half. Then they did. Not all the way back, not what they were at 9. But Lily wrote a letter, an actual paper, 4 pages, and Marina read it twice and cried and answered it. Lily came to the wedding. 4th row. She cried harder than my mother, which was not a competition anybody expected her to win. I have thought a great deal about why I said nothing that first night at Quince. The easy answer is that I was curious. That is true and not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I had spent 35 years in rooms where everybody was performing something. Melbourne faculty dinners, my parents' friends, the polished machinery of a life arranged for me before I could object to it. Everyone was presenting a version. Everyone was fine. Everyone was managing. And then a woman opened a menu and her face told the truth before she could stop it. And I recognized something I had not seen in a very long time, which was a person failing to hide. That is what got me, not the lie, the failure of the lie. Because a person who is bad at pretending is a person who has something underneath worth the trouble of hiding. So here is what I would say to you, and it is the only thing I actually know. Watch the small things, not what people tell you about themselves, because everybody has a script and most people rehearse it. Watch their face in the second before the script starts. Watch their hands. Watch whether they look at the price. Watch who they become when the waiter comes, when the boss walks in, when the person with money starts talking. And when you catch somebody being real by accident, do not make them pay for it. That is the whole thing. That is everything I learned. Do not make people pay for the moment they slip and let you see them. There is one more piece. The night before our wedding, Marina came out of the bedroom holding a shoebox. Not the pearl ones. The other pair. Lily's shoes half a size too small with the strap that had cut her ankle open on the Embarcadero. She had kept them for 4 years. "Why?" I asked her, and she said, "To remember what it felt like to walk in shoes that hurt and tell everybody they were mine." She threw them out that night. I watched her do it. Borrowed shoes take you to borrowed places. They get you through a dinner. They get you into a room. But you cannot walk home in them, and every one of us eventually has to walk home. So let me ask you what I asked at the start of all this, now that you know how it ended. If you had been at that table and known within 90 seconds that the person across from you was lying about everything, would you have said something? Would you have been polite and correct and ended it cleanly, gone home and never known? Or would you have picked up your menu and let her keep going and found out who she actually was? Tell me in the comments. I read them. And tell me where you are watching from tonight, because these stories travel further than I have any right to expect. And if this one got to you at all, do me one small kindness. Tap the like button so it finds somebody else who needs it, and subscribe, because I am here every week with a new story about the strange, unplanned ways people find each other. Somebody out there is about to sit down across from a stranger. I hope you are paying attention when it happens.